Well, hello everyone. This is Nathaniel Darnell, the president of the Georgia Republican Assembly, and I'm very pleased to be here in this interview today with State Representative Noelle Kahaian, one of our GRA-endorsed state reps who won office last year and has been hitting the ground running hard over the last legislative session. She's here to tell us her story. So, Noelle, thank you so much for being on our program.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we first met you not as a legislator, but as a activist yourself for the cause, and then you eventually ran for office. But how did you originally become an activist, and what led you to run for state house?
Well, when I first moved to Georgia, a friend of mine was an executive director at a pregnancy center, and I was redoing the office. It had the 1980s decor, and I said, this has got to be fixed. So I just went in.
Mm,
I pretty much had carte blanche, and I
mm,
just donated time, donated everything. And I was painting a wall one day, and she said, "Oh my gosh, we just lost, our seventh grade volunteer teacher for this healthy relationships course. Can't teach. Can you
mm,
fill in?" I said, Why am I going to talk to kids about abstinence? Why am I going to talk to kids about STDs?" And she says, "No, it's a great curriculum. You'll love it. And it's the best thing I have ever done in my whole life, teaching kids how to preserve their sexual health, their reproductive health. It's just as important as their GPA, is what I tell them. So Georgia has a great program. And I found out from them that there were powers at work trying to teach them very different things, different
mm,
theories. And so then I got active with that. They told me about the obscene books in their schools.
mm.
I've got very active in that. I'd say 2018, I got really active in that. A few years later, but went up to the Capitol testifying for child protecting bills. Then I got into the election integrity arena.
Yeah,
So
you developed a reputation as a principled activist for several years before you ever ran for office. But the first time you ran, you didn't quite succeed. What happened there?
So Georgia got redistricted, as we always do
Mhm,
every decade, and a brand new House seat opened up in my backyard. So I've been active in my GOP precinct committeeman, worked my way up to first vice chair. I seem to volunteer for a living, which is not much of a living, but you sleep great at night.
right.
I do have a job, but I just felt like I was volunteering all the time. But I loved it because I frankly think one of the best GOPs in the whole state. So myself and another gentleman from our GOP decided to run, and we had great camaraderie. And then two other people joined in the race, so it was a four-way race, which is so fun. Four people, four Republicans running. And then I made it to the runoff. And if anybody has handled a runoff in June in Georgia, it is a slog. But
Wow.
I lost by
Right.
22 votes.
But you've had developed some name recognition, you developed some experience through that process, I'm sure.
And I
And,
was terrified of door
mhm,
knocking. I can go read obscene materials to protect kids at the Capitol, but
mhm,
door knocking, I'm into the research. I'm a digger, I'm a
mhm,
worker bee, but knocking now I love door knocking.
mhm.
I love
And
engaging
you have to if you're campaigning at a grassroots level. That's the most effective way to do it, right? So,
thousands of doors. I don't even think I had any surrogates.
mm,
It was just myself and my twin sister. She'd drive, or my husband would drive, and it was like you drive, run up the driveway, talk, and then my drivers would get mad because I would spend so long. I mean, I would be playing with dogs and people's bunnies, and we actually saved a bird that flew out of a house once.
wow.
That took hours, and I love birds. I love all animals.
Well, you probably made a huge impression on the people that got to meet you face to face in your constituency when you did that, and you learned some things along the way. So, was it the next term that you ran again? And were you able to
Yes.
get the same person that beat you before, or was it somebody?
Yes. Yes. So I, sat back and said, okay, a Republican has this seat, maybe this is not what God wanted for me. And, totally fine. I'm always busy. So, you learn and you keep going. But when I was seeing what was coming out of the Capitol from my representation, I said, I've got to try again because this is not going the way I expected it to go. So ran again, and thankfully it was just myself and the incumbent, and won by almost 5%, which is pretty big for
Wow.
beating an incumbent. It was pretty big. None of us expected it. We went into the race thinking we've already won, so when you run against an incumbent, you're running for your reasons, but it's also you're pushing that candidate more towards your position.
Right. So
It,
it's a win-win in that sense, because even if you don't win the election, you're still compelling them to make more conservative stances, right?
exactly.
Principled stances. That's a great way to look at it, for sure.
I mean, it's not easy, but like you said, I had the name recognition already. I didn't really shut anything down. I was just too busy to shut some stuff down, but it was easy to resurrect the prior websites and things.
So your story is kind of like a David and Goliath story, because you won, but nobody would have necessarily seen that coming. We were pleased to endorse you for that Republican primary because the candidate, the incumbent you were running against, had a very bad low vote score, and you were obviously very well known as a principled Republican. But it wouldn't have necessarily been a foregone conclusion that you would win on that rematch because you were outspent, right? What was the exact approximate figures, like
About
45,000 to
yeah,
100?
about 250 grand to about 45,000.
Wow, wow. But
Yeah.
even that, though, shows you, because we've had so many candidates that have challenged incumbents over the last few years, and they've run, to these Hail Marys where they have literally no money and they think they can just, put their name on the ballot and that's it. They're going to win automatically almost. And you've shown that you do have to make some effort, even when you are running against a really bad RINO type incumbent. You do need to make effort. You do to have some resources. You got to have some money. Um, what was your
People,
campaign?
yeah, people have to have skin in the game. It's not
Hmm.
just the candidate. Of course, we loaned our campaign money also, but your friends and your family and the churches, everybody's got to have some skin in the game. So the biggest problem candidates have was asking for money.
Yeah.
It's
So how did you go about it? Did you do anything differently that second time from the first time you ran?
I was very disciplined, and I had a friend help me with actually making the phone calls. And if somebody said, yes, I would love to donate, but they don't donate that day, not dogging them, but trying to get back in a phone call again. And this is, you said you would help, and I really need help. And $25, $50, $100, $1,000, it helps. And there were people that I had actually helped with their legislation in their states. A friend from Texas actually
Mm,
donated. People that lived in Democrat districts that said, I don't really have anybody, so I would love to help with your campaign because I know that you're going to be a worker bee and you've helped me before. And then for me to pay that forward is also really important. But raising the money is probably the most important because it makes you more like a serious candidate. And
mm,
people, it's just human psyche. People want to back a winner, and they
right.
they really want you to win. And if they've got some skin in the game also, they're going to be more willing to say, hey, let me help you knock a door. I had some moms from Cherokee County, because
Wow.
I helped them years ago, drive
Wow.
down and help me drive around and put up signs. And
That's quite a distance. Yeah.
it was fun. It was like the moms getting together again. And I had the Moms for Liberty actually invited me down to Mar-a-Lago for a mom's event. And
Nice.
they didn't have to invite me from Georgia, but I'm not going to turn down an invite to Mar-a-Lago. But it was actually more fun the second time.
So when you ran the second time, how early did you start campaigning? If qualifying is in March and the primary is in May, when did you actually begin campaigning?
As soon as my husband said, yes, you can run.
Was
As
that the
soon
prior year?
as December-ish, I think.
December? Okay.
I felt like December, I'm not exactly sure. But this is just takes a toll on the family. So when I knew that he was on board, and people in the community were kind of like, come on, Noelle, you got to run. Like, we see what's
Yeah.
happening also. So they had already been petitioning heaven.
Mhm.
Uh,
What made you think that you would win the second go around since you were running against the same candidate? What
I
gave you faith that it would be different the second time?
I think, we were surprised, but based on the voting record and the incumbent had been absent a lot. And
Hmm.
our district, no district likes that, of course, but I call us hardworking Henry. We just are. It's just we have multiple jobs. We schlep the kids all over the state sometimes, travel things. We just are hardworking. So when we see someone who may not be doing the job that we're expecting, people don't even want to give that person a second chance. So when I saw that and when I saw the votes coming out, the incumbent sponsored a Jane Fonda sex ed bill.
Oh,
And I will
totally opposite of what you stand for and what you've represented.
Yeah, and I'll go to war to protect kids from Jane
Mm.
Fonda. So,
Wow.
and
Wow.
thankfully we got all the Republicans that year, the year that I actually had announced I was running. So that session, all the Republicans removed their names from that bill after the stink that we caused up at the Capitol. So that
Wow.
was a win.
So were you surprised the night of the election by the results? What do you attribute your success to most of all?
Door knocking,
Door knocking?
and telling the truth. We can't, sometimes as Republicans, we're like, oh, we don't want to say this about another Republican, but if you stand in the truth, it will make not only you free, but it takes the scales off of other people's eyes so they can actually see
Hmm.
it. And if you're in the truth, if you're speaking the truth, that that's it. Really, everybody appreciates that, I think. And you have to be willing to, speak the truth about yourself at the same time.
So is there anything else that you might say to any aspiring candidates that want to challenge RINO incumbents? Any other lessons learned you think would be really helpful for them to be aware of going into it with their eyes wide open?
They need to have a good hard look at themselves because it's a nasty, dirty, down. Ugh, it's awful. I mean, I actually had a false ethics complaint filed against me
Yes,
in
yes, with that.
in order to send out a survey and a mailer saying that I was under an ethics investigation that their team had filed.
And that was being done by a fellow Republican against you. That
It
was
was
not a
done.
Democratic thing.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
I have no problems with the Democrats in my county, with the Democrat in the general. Well, he did do an AI voicemail
Mm,
pretending to be Trump, saying
mm.
not, yeah, saying not to vote for me. But, besides that, I mean, I guess I expected,
You
something.
expect the Democrats to be, yeah, underhanded, but you don't expect it necessarily
But
from
in a
the Republicans.
primary, you have to make sure that you've got really thick skin.
Hmm.
And you might think you do until you get punched in the face. What's that saying? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Oh man, so true, so true.
Especially punched in the face by somebody that you think should help you.
Mm,
Be prepared for endorsements in a Republican primary that probably shouldn't happen.
mm,
Yeah, we had a prominent person come to our district, to our GOP,
mhm.
and endorse the incumbent in front of our GOP.
Oh my word.
That made our GOP so mad because
Mm,
we're always taught, not to do that. And then when it
mm,
happened, it actually might have worked in my favor because,
mm,
people know that that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that.
mm. Rules for
Um,
me and not for me. Yeah.
and the other thing is to take a look at yourself and look back. I heard this from Mark Meadows yesterday. He said,
Hmm.
look back, or if you're vetting a candidate, look back in this person's past or have them explain how they have exemplified courage.
Mm,
Because he said, courage is contagious. Yes, of course. But
right.
until you're actually faced with something that you literally have to be courageous about,
Right.
you might not have it in you. Like you can say, oh,
Hmm.
I'll do this and that. But when it comes down to it, you might not have and that's okay. You might not have it. No, if I ran 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't be the same way I am.
Hmm.
But having to go through
Life experiences like that.
exactly. Yeah.
Well,
And
and on that note
I
of
had to be
courage,
courageous. I had to be courageous my freshman year, that's for sure.
right. Well, on that note of courage, you definitely were tried during the campaign season, but then you were thrust into a lot of situations that tested your courage. It sounded like at the state capitol as a new state rep. It seems like with the establishment, the way it often works is they will fight you, fight you, fight you, and they'll throw, like you said, even dirty tricks at you. But if they lose to you, their next strategy is to try to incorporate you, try to assimilate you, and be like, "Hey, buddy, here, if we can't beat you, you join us," kind of thing. And it sounded like you were getting some pressure early on, initially, when you first came on from the establishment, but you also had some good working relationships with our friends at the Georgia Freedom Caucus, people that we've also endorsed, like Colton Moore, Charlie Spurd, Mallory Staples. What exactly happened as you started the legislative session?
Well, having them and their courage also really buoys you to know that you can take on something because you have friends, that will help
Right.
you and give you great advice. And there was actually I believe seven freshman Republicans. So
Mm,
we had lots of, training that we did, and all the staff was just lovely, and legislative council, everybody's been more than helpful. And the freshmen, I mean, I'm pretty sure I had the most experience, if I can recall, because we
because of all the activism you've done in the past. Yeah.
right, right, and we would go around the table, and people at different functions would say, what made you want to run, and how did that happen? And so I would explain being at the Capitol for years, and they would say, some of them, they got a phone call and were asked to run, which I
Mm,
know happens. That's the system. I get that. I guess I was a little surprised there wasn't more grassroots. But I don't know why that would have surprised me. It's a system.
mhm,
I get it. If I
mhm.
was in charge of the system, I would, call up Nathaniel and say, hey, why did you run? Why did you run for this? But the first week I was told basically that if I vote no on such and such, or don't get with the program, that it's, quote, going to be very bad for my legislative career.
Oh, wow. That sounds ominous.
And I thought to myself, good God, they're all here for their legislative careers. I
Mm,
mean, duh, but that was my light bulb moment, that they said the quiet part out loud. Like,
mm.
okay, I see everything now. And I'm
Right.
not I'm not a climber. People are
Right.
already asking me to run for Congress or something. No, I'm not a
Trying to
climber.
do the most good where you're at.
I
Yeah.
love I love my district, and these voters, and people say, I try not to ever say, my district, because it's not my district. I have the privilege of sitting in their seat. It's in
Right.
it's in the back row. The cameras can't see me. I am in the back row, but it's fine. I'm exactly where God wants me to be.
Backbenchers, they used to say in the British Parliament, right?
Yeah, it's totally fine. I love the seat that I'm sitting in, because it's their seat. Someday somebody else will be sitting in that chair.
Right.
But it's the best. It's just such been a great experience. And having, Freedom Caucus support and having
Mhm.
their training.
So you mentioned that they kind of give you this ominous threat, and then how was that tested? What were some of the bills or the issues where you found yourself at loggerheads with the Republican caucus leadership?
Yeah, well, right away is the budget, so the supplemental
Mhm.
budget from the year before, and they had gutted school choice, and they grew the budget, I don't remember, 64%, something like that. And
Mm,
and the big thing for Freedom Caucus, and I think most conservative legislators, hopefully, is we don't want to grow government. We don't want
right.
to raise taxes. We don't want to
Right.
have to infringe on personal liberties, or increase regulations. That's
Right.
an easier no vote. You
And
know,
it's a part of our Republican Party platform and has been for decades. Yeah.
in the beginning of session, Governor Kemp said, threatened, or someone in his office threatened, that if we tried to improve or vote no on tort reform, he would fund a primary challenger.
Wow, that sounds scary,
It's
intimidating a
a
little bit.
crazy, crazy way to start session. So,
Mm.
so we had Governor, I keep saying Governor Moore. Why? Stop.
Well, maybe that's a sign of things to come someday.
I said it before, a couple of weeks ago or something. But Colton Moore, Senator Moore, was assaulted and arrested my first week. Like,
Wow.
I don't know if anybody's had a freshman year quite like I have. And then we ended way early on Sine Die. or well, the Senate adjourned at
But that
9.
was over that election integrity controversy
And
bill.
I was
Yeah.
so,
So
and
reckless.
again, I just feel like I was just so naive because I was so excited to vote for this bill, 379 or 397,
Did you feel
397.
somewhat inspired by Colton Moore's experience being wrongfully? Yeah.
Absolutely. Our state constitution says he can't be arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Even me driving to or from the Capitol, if I'm on my legislative duties, I can't be arrested. And if you understand our constitution, our state constitution predates our federal constitution, which is
Mm-hmm.
one of the few states um,
Mm-hmm.
that have that. But it was because the king could just arrest Parliament or do whatever he wanted. So it's a huge protection for the constituents. And I saw it, like it unfolded in front of my eyes. And then to see the video of him in handcuffs
Mm.
and the executive branch laughing.
Wow.
And I told Garland Favorito this, it changed me as a person,
Mm.
as a legislator. It really steeled my spine.
Mm.
And the fact that so few people said anything, which means everyone's condoning this. Do
Mm.
you have our constitution? I mean, I have it, our state constitution earmarked and the sticky colored labels, and I was just gobsmacked.
Mm.
And to see the intent, they intended to do that to him.
Mm-hmm. It was planned. It was not spontaneous, was it?
As the
Even
chief
the
of
curtains that
staff,
they had around to
yeah.
prevent the media from seeing it, and then of course the media broke through and saw it anyway.
And his chief of staff was trying to avoid it and pleading with them like this. It felt like the Twilight Zone. So if we can't fix this to make sure it never happens again, what
Mm-hmm.
happened to me? It could happen to me next.
But yeah, after you've
Don't
seen
do
that
it wrong.
happen to somebody like Holton, it makes the threats that they made getting up in your face and maybe
Right.
shouting in your face a little bit seem to pale in comparison, doesn't it?
Right. And people talk about, accountability. There has to be accountability. I see it as
Mm.
a privilege to have an R in front of my name. It's
Mm.
a privilege that I don't just get to walk around and say, hey, I'm a Republican candidate now. I'm a Republican legislator. I think you need to be able to prove that.
Yeah, and it really reflects poorly on the Republican Party, doesn't it? When you have Republican speakers or legislators that are participating in assault and battery against a legislator, false arrest, and violating the Constitution like that, doesn't it? So that's
Right.
one of the reasons why we have to be careful about that.
And people say, oh, you can't, talk about your boss like that. I'm sorry. Speaker Burns is not my boss. He doesn't vote for me. I am sitting in the seat of these constituents. And
Mm.
that was my first week. Like I said, I got text messages from
Mm.
voters asking for my oath of office.
Wow.
And I was like, because this district, I feel like they keep a pot of tar on a low boil. As they
That's great.
should. What if every district was like that? What if all of us were on our toes? Like, oh,
Mhm.
I can't do that. Oh, I don't know. Oh, I can't do that. But
Right.
it feels like there's just green drones up there. Listen, Nathaniel, I could have a fantastic freshman year. I could
Mhm.
sit back, I could drink my coffee, go get my
Mhm.
snacks in the ante room and press that green button. And I would have no problems. But
Yeah.
that is not me. That is not this district. Uh,
Right.
I, I want to get to a yes.
You're a fighter. Yeah.
And I want to get to a yes if, but now I'll have people coming up to me. Oh, I have this bill. Oh, it doesn't raise taxes. Oh, it doesn't grow government. I'm saying that like, okay,
Well, they know
people,
what your criteria is. They're
people are
trying
people
to.
are getting it. I don't have to keep saying it. And I'll have people come up to me and say, thank you for voting yes on my bill.
Because it's so like unusual, right? It's not a.
And I love to say that was a great bill because
Mhm.
that's what it hopefully could be about. Maybe I'm a Pollyanna, but
Yeah.
maybe
Well, there's
next
just so many bad bills that are being circulated. It's no wonder that you develop a reputation for voting no so often. Well,
maybe next year. It was I think it was HB 81. This
mm,
bill, it was model legislation. It's an interstate compact. And
mm,
over 200 years, we've only had less than 40 interstate compacts because they're a big deal. So I'm reading through this bill and I realized I was going to be a no on it. And then I found a couple of sections where the final legal jurisdiction was not even in Georgia. So the
Mm,
court of legal jurisdiction was the United States District Court of the District of Columbia.
mm,
Uh, I'm like, I'm not about to hit the green button for for my constituents,
mm,
for that to be one of the worst jurisdictions, right, in the whole country.
mhm,
And we're just saying yes to that. So I said to one of the reps, I said, what's the final, what's the court of the legal jurisdiction? And he says, I trust my chairman.
oh, oh,
So, what? Because if it comes to the floor, you're supposed to vote yes.
mm.
I mean,
So
so
so many
some states,
legislators just turning their brains off and doing what the person above them tells them to, right?
So some states, they will debate and vote on every single bill. Roll call vote, every single bill. I mean, that's a lot. Maybe, we can get there, but
Hmm.
I love the code. I love to read the code. I want to protect the code. People are like, why don't you run for a commissioner? I'm like, no, I love the Georgia code.
Mm, that's cool. So we've talked about some bad bills, and maybe there's a few more that ought to be mentioned. There was obviously the tort reform bill that you mentioned that you voted no on. There was the
And I
budget. You voted
and I
no.
wanted to get to a yes on tort reform.
Sure.
That does need to be reformed, and we were one vote short of fixing two things in the bill. And when I saw that 91, I was like, darn it, we were so close. And one of the reps was actually fired the very next
Wow.
day for voting no on tort reform. So
Wow.
the threats were followed through on.
Wow. Well, you also had that big ag bill that gave a lot of big businesses in the agricultural industry basically carte blanche to not face liability if they harm their customers. Lots of corporate welfare bills, it seemed like, in the legislature this year that sailed through. And I know you
Yeah, I
voted
think they're
no.
calling it the Monsanto bill.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Lots of bad bills, but there were some good bills that I saw you also voted for or co-signed on, like, for example, House Bill 441, the Equal Protection Act for the preborn. You were a
Mhm.
co-signer on that bill. What
Mhm.
were some other bills that you were happy to support this last
Yeah.
session?
So I sponsored a homeschool bill, a fairness bill for testing. So if a homeschooler wants to take their standardized tests at their local school district, a lot of schools were or parents were complaining that their school districts were saying you can't take it here. So they
Mm,
were having to drive 2, 3, 4 hours. The testimony was nuts. But thankfully, I think it was Senator Dixon had the bill on the Senate side, and the
mhm,
Senate's able to pass bills faster or quicker or more efficiently to us. So my bill, didn't even need to get heard. But our homeschool legal defense was for that bill, and Georgia
nice,
homeschoolers, and just having the homeschoolers is just so fun. My twin sister homeschooled, so I got to have fun with my nieces for some of their homeschool events. So
great.
that's just common sense, to
Yeah.
let the kids test in their district. So that was a good one. We had a childhood independence bill. Brittany Patterson was actually arrested when her child was playing too far from home, and a police officer picked the child up, brought the child home, and he was 11 or 12, something like that. It was in the news. So we
Mm,
had a childhood independence bill for that. I'm trying to remember who the senator was that had that bill. So the Senate bill was the one that was able to pass through the Senate and through the House. So that was
mm.
exciting. A couple other ones that are I'm not thinking straight on.
Well, that's great. There's obviously one of the things you talked about was that when your bills are trying to get through, one of the ways they punish you is by saying, "Oh, your bills will never see the light of day because you voted no on my bill." The comeuppance there.
Right.
After a
And
while,
I've seen that with Chairman Charlize Byrd. She's the chair of the Freedom Caucus, and I've seen that with her. I've seen that with Colton, and I'm not up there to pass bills, frankly.
mhm.
So I'm okay with that. If I get a bill passed, great. I'm more of a support player anyway. So
Mhm.
I'll help do
Well,
the
and you're helping
research.
to get the word out. You're helping to get the message out about these good bills and the bad bills and how things are run and how they need to be fixed at the Capitol. So you said that after a while, initially they gave you a hard time, but did that continue or did it change over a while
No,
as you developed a
so
reputation?
yeah, so I talked to a prior rep, and she said, they're going to ice you out. You're not going to get invited to things, and the muckety muck dinners and things like that. And that absolutely happened. But I'm more of a loner anyway.
Mhm.
I like people and I like to make the contacts and I like to do that. But when you're at dinner and you find out that Monsanto is paying for the dinner,
Mm.
all of a sudden, food doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't quite taste so good.
Yeah,
Um,
I worked for a state legislator several years ago who just refused to go to all the luncheons and all the dinners just because he didn't want to be beholden to any of those groups when they felt like they needed to cash in a favor later. He just avoided all such events.
yeah. And
Um,
now, if they wanted to give me a check for something, I will put that in the bank and vote the way my constituents need me to vote.
mhm,
Or otherwise, I have to beg my constituents, for the
mhm.
money. So that's when I'll make an exception for that.
As long as they understand up front, like you can't buy me. This is a donation, free and clear.
Right.
Right. Well, that's great. So, is there any other major lessons you feel like you learned from your experience, your first legislative session? If you were talking to somebody who was getting ready to be sworn in, and they were like you, a little bit maybe naive first going into it, but there are lots of principles, and what would you say? What would you warn them about? What
They've
lessons?
got to, yeah, they've got to manage their expectations.
Mm,
You know, you have to, and I know the process takes a very long time. I know I've been up there. Somebody told me that the average is 5 years to pass a bill. But when
wow.
you're seeing other states like Alabama, Tennessee,
Mm.
Florida, Ohio eating our lunch, you can get so when you're a freshman going in or thinking about going in, you really have to play the long game. You might be there just to expose things, to make the contacts, to
Mhm.
pray for somebody. I had my anointing oil one day and I was able to pray for a rep. So you really don't know what you're there for. God, he knows the whole big picture better than we do. And as long as you're not leading with ego, if you really want to be a civic servant, a servant leader, that's literally what you have to do. But it's so seductive. You put a badge on, and
Mhm.
all of a
All
sudden
of a sudden, and you walk into that Capitol building every day, and it all looks so grandiose, and it can really start to go to your head if you're not careful, right?
people will treat you differently and you can never let that happen. I had a project I was working on that was like last minute for the admins and I just felt so bad. So I dug in there too. If I need to sit on the floor and organize stuff or help with testimony, or, sometimes we've got parents there with their kids at the Capitol, and I'll go play with the kids. I don't need to be
Mhm.
involved in all the fancy stuff. Just let me have fun with the kids and the people that actually take their time out to come to the Capitol
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
a
we were
bill that you may not even get to testify on.
right. We were at the Capitol multiple times a session on different bills, and there was several bills. House Bill 441, we didn't know for sure we would get a hearing on, even though we went down there 3 or 4 times before we finally did. And yeah, so it's always good to see some progress. And I'm glad, like you said, you have that perspective. It is a long game. Every single person involved in Republican politics, whether it's just at the party level or if it's at the legislature, we really do have to see it as a long game because progress is not usually instant. So I appreciate that perspective. Is there any other lessons or any closing remarks you'd like to make before we wrap it up here today?
Just make sure that your heart's in it for the right place, that you're there for the right reasons, and have an accountability team. I had some great people tell me never be in a room alone with somebody, you know,
Yeah.
don't even be in an elevator alone with somebody.
Mhm.
I'm not saying anything's going to happen, but just make sure that your integrity cannot be ever questioned. And if you need to CC people on emails, do that too. But having an accountability team that says, hey, you're getting kind of high and mighty over here,
Mm.
knock that down a bit. And make sure that you can say that to somebody else. You can't just have yes people around you, because there's plenty of yes people.
And that will really mess you up if you're surrounded only by yes people, won't it?
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, look at President Trump. He's got no people. He's lots of no people around him. Not that he ever listens.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, Noelle. This has really been valuable to hear the lessons you've learned from your experiences. Hopefully, we're going to be able to multiply your kind as we've already started to do. I mean, a couple years ago, we only had 3 legislators that were over 80% on their vote scorecard, and Now we've gone up with you and a few others that have been inspired by y'all's example. And so hopefully we'll continue to increase the Freedom Caucus and get more GRA endorsed legislators in there that will be over 80% on their scores, and really hopefully raise the bar for the Republican Party, help people build confidence in the Republican branding again, because they see that the Republican Party is actually fulfilling its promises. When people campaign and say this is what the party stands for, they see that translate into actual policy making.
That's right. I had one lady say to me, "I didn't know you were her. You were the representative." And I said, "Why is that?" And she says, "Because I see you in the kitchen at the pregnancy center banquet."
Oh,
So we could still, still be that Republican that we campaigned on, that constitutional conservative that we campaigned on, and to see that go through the years and through the sessions, that, like you said, that encourages other people, because the state that I came from, these Republicans stopped voting. They just stopped. And I can
turn their brains off.
it happening here, because they said they're a bunch of frauds. They're not doing what they said they were going to do. So they just stopped voting altogether. And we cannot have that happen in Georgia. I won't let it.
Well, thank you for your courage. Thank you for your conviction, and thank you for your steadfastness. We are so grateful that you not only were elected up against huge odds, but that you went through the pressure cooker of the establishment, and you came out the other side resilient. And we're just so proud of you for doing that. And hopefully your example will continue to inspire others. We pray that you'll continue to stand strong, because I'm sure the battle is not over yet. You're going to continue to face pressure from the establishment and the RINOs and everybody else at the Democratic Party, et cetera. So please continue to stand strong. And if we can ever do anything to help support you in your ongoing battles at the Capitol, we want to do it any way we can. So thank you once again.
Yeah, your support and the member support and the prayers, that means just everything.
Well, thank you so much, Noelle. You have a great rest of your day. We'll talk
Also.
again soon.